I asked Kanye about Beyoncé on stage. He said, "That's not her up there. It's Sasha." At first, it sounded like a random comment, but something in his tone sent chills down my spine. It was not a joke. It was a warning. What Kanye said made me realize that the persona of Sasha Fierce is not just a stage act. It is a vessel for something far darker, something much more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. What did he know that I did not? The conversation with Kanye started off like any other. We were backstage at one of the biggest events of the year, and I had the chance to talk to him, just the two of us. I asked about Beyoncé. It was a simple question. How does she do it? How does she transform every night on stage? He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to give me a generic answer. He had the perfect opportunity to throw out some compliment about her artistry, the way she commands the stage or how hard she works. But instead, his response caught me off guard. "That's not her up there. It's Sasha." At first, I thought I misunderstood. What did he mean? Sasha? I had heard of Beyoncé's alter ego, Sasha Fierce, but this did not feel like just an explanation. It felt like something far darker. His voice was low, almost as if he was warning me, but he quickly brushed it off as though it was nothing. But for me, it was not nothing. His words lingered in the air like a heavy fog pressing in on my chest. The more I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. It's Sasha. Those words felt like a key unlocking something I had never considered before. It was as though he was hinting at something I had not been privy to. Something beyond the performance. Why would he say that? Why was it important enough to him to separate Beyoncé from her stage persona in such a way? The more I played the conversation back in my mind, the more I began to doubt everything I thought I knew about Beyoncé. Sasha Fierce was always portrayed as a carefully constructed alter ego, a way for Beyoncé to tap into her power on stage. But was that the truth? Could there be something more sinister lurking behind the surface? It was not just the words he said, it was the way he said them. There was a tone of caution in his voice. He did not sound like someone who was just talking about an entertainer slipping into her role for a performance. He sounded like someone who had seen something far more dangerous than that. I had to know more. I began to question everything I knew about Beyoncé and Sasha Fierce. What if Sasha was not just a creative invention? What if, like Kanye seemed to be implying, Sasha was something more? Something beyond Beyoncé's control? The unsettling truth began to settle in like a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. What if Sasha Fierce was not just a persona she created to perform, but something that had taken hold of her in ways no one ever talked about? What if there was something inside Beyoncé, something dark that no one was willing to admit? And then, the thought that plagued me was this. What if Kanye knew something I did not? What if he had witnessed something I could not even imagine? That conversation, that one line, "That's not her up there, it's Sasha," changed everything. I could not shake it from my mind. It haunted me. It made me realize that the image Beyoncé had built, the glamorous, powerful, and confident icon that everyone adored, might not be as real as we thought. There was more beneath the surface, and if I was going to uncover the truth, I had to go deeper. But what I did not know at the time was how dangerous this path would be. The deeper I dug, the darker the truth became. The more I tried to understand, the more I realized that Sasha Fierce was not just a concept. It was a force. And that force was far more dangerous than I could have ever anticipated. But this was only the beginning. The more I uncovered, the darker things got. I needed to understand who or what Sasha truly was and what she really meant for Beyoncé. After that conversation with Kanye, I could not stop thinking about his words. The more I replayed them in my mind, the more I realized something was off. That's not her up there. It's Sasha. It felt like a key to a door I did not know existed, and I had to find out what was behind it. I had heard of Beyoncé's alter ego, Sasha Fierce, but I had never thought of her as anything more than a persona, a way for Beyoncé to tap into a different part of herself on stage. But Kanye's words made me question that. I started asking around. At first, people were cautious. They spoke of Sasha Fierce in the same way that the public did, as a stage persona, a character Beyoncé adopted to give her performances that extra edge. But the more I pushed, the more cracks started to appear in their stories. People who had worked with Beyoncé, who had seen her behind the scenes, began to tell me things that sent chills down my spine. One person I spoke to was a former backup dancer who had worked with Beyoncé for years. They told me about the moments when Beyoncé would step off stage, her energy completely drained, only to transform back into herself. But there was something unsettling about it. It's like she becomes a different person. Sasha is powerful. It's like she's in control and Beyoncé is just not there, they said. The way they spoke about it made me uneasy. It was not just that Sasha was a character. There was something real, something terrifying about the way they described her. Another person I spoke to was a vocal coach who had worked closely with Beyoncé during the early years of her career. They explained how Beyoncé used Sasha Fierce as a way to release her fears and anxieties about performing, almost as if she needed Sasha to be the bold, fearless version of herself she could not be on her own. But as the years passed, something changed. Sasha stopped being something Beyoncé controlled. She became something Beyoncé could not escape. At first, it was like an act, just a way to separate the stage persona from the real person, the vocal coach explained. But over time, it became harder and harder to tell where Sasha began and Beyoncé ended. It was like she was losing herself in Sasha, and Sasha was taking over. The more I heard, the more I realized that Sasha was not just an act. It was a shift, a complete transformation, one that no one had ever truly understood. Beyoncé had created her to be powerful, confident, untouchable. But somewhere along the way, Sasha began to control her, to make decisions for her. The people I spoke to painted a picture of a woman who was slowly losing her grip on reality. They spoke about times when Beyoncé would lose herself in the persona, not remembering what she had done or said. It was as though Sasha had taken complete control of her body, her mind, and even her soul. What was worse was that I began to hear whispers of a deeper, darker power behind Sasha. Some spoke of it in hushed tones, like they were afraid to say too much. They talked about rituals, strange, secretive moments during Beyoncé's rise to fame. Rumors suggested that Sasha might not just be a product of Beyoncé's creativity. Some believed she had been awakened, summoned by forces beyond their understanding. One source, someone who had been with Beyoncé through her early days in Destiny's Child, mentioned the possibility of an occult influence, though they were hesitant to speak too openly about it. These stories felt like fragments of a puzzle, but no one was willing to put the pieces together. They were too afraid. The idea that Sasha could have been more than just a persona, More than just a manifestation of Beyoncé's will, sent a ripple of fear through everyone I spoke to. As I delved deeper, I started to uncover more unsettling details. There were accounts of people who had seen Beyoncé perform, and then backstage, where she would be distant, disconnected, almost as if she had no memory of what had just happened. Some people claimed that it was like Beyoncé would step off stage, only to become someone else entirely, someone unrecognizable. The way she acted, the way she spoke, was not the Beyoncé they knew. It was Sasha. At first I thought it was just exhaustion. But the more I learned, the more I began to understand that this was not a simple case of a tired performer. This was something far more profound, something far more dangerous. Sasha was not just a tool Beyoncé used to perform. She was a presence, a force. But where had Sasha come from? Was she just a product of Beyoncé's need to separate herself from the pressure of fame? Or was there something darker at play? Something that Beyoncé may have unknowingly invited into her life. The more I pieced things together, the more I realized that Sasha was not just a creation. It was an entity, something that had taken hold of Beyoncé, something that might never let go. And that realization was terrifying. As I began to reach out to more people close to Beyoncé, I started hearing about moments when Sasha seemed to take control in ways that left the people around her speechless. There were accounts of strange, almost violent outbursts from Beyoncé, moments when she seemed to lose herself completely to the persona. She would lash out at those around her, only to later have no memory of the events. But these were not just moments of anger. They were moments of pure, unfiltered power. Sasha was not just Beyoncé's alter ego. She was a force that bent everyone around her to her will. And as the years went on, that force became harder and harder to control. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that the truth was not something anyone wanted to talk about. Sasha had become something beyond Beyoncé's control, something that was growing stronger with every passing year. But what if Sasha was not just a persona? What if she was something far older, something that Beyoncé had unknowingly awakened? The truth was about to get darker. By the time I started to realize the depth of Sasha's influence on Beyoncé, it felt like a train wreck I could not stop. The more I learned, the more I understood that Sasha was not merely an alter ego. It was something far darker. A part of me wondered whether Beyoncé ever really understood what she had unleashed. What I discovered shocked me to the core. Sasha was more than just a persona. It was a power that consumed her, a force that took over her completely. At first, I dismissed the idea of Sasha as something purely psychological. I thought maybe it was just a way for Beyoncé to compartmentalize the different sides of herself. But the stories I was hearing, the strange, unexplainable things that people had witnessed, began to make me question everything I had assumed. I spoke to more people, some who had worked with her during her rise to fame, others who had seen her in more private moments. Their stories did not line up with the typical narrative of a star creating a stage persona to amplify her performance. What they described was something far more terrifying. One of the most chilling things I learned came from a former bodyguard. He had worked for Beyoncé for years, and although he was loyal to her, he spoke about things that made me shiver. There were times when she was on stage, and it was like there was someone else in her body. He explained. You could see it in her eyes. When she would look at you, it was not Beyoncé looking back. It was Sasha. this bodyguard had witnessed something I had only heard rumors about. The moment when Sasha took over completely. And it was not just in her performances. It was in her interactions with people. The way she changed. The way she became almost unrecognizable. He described how, on one occasion, after a show, Beyoncé came backstage looking disoriented. She did not even remember what she had just done, he said. It was as if she had blacked out. But Sasha was alive, and she was in full control. It did not take long before I realized that this was not just about performances. Sasha's influence extended beyond the stage. The people who were close to Beyoncé spoke of times when Sasha would take over in personal moments, when Beyoncé's true self would fade into the background. The line between the two, Beyoncé and Sasha, became increasingly blurred. People began to wonder if Beyoncé had any control over what was happening. And then came the reports from the studio. I spoke to someone who had worked with Beyoncé on a recent album. This person had seen firsthand how Sasha had affected her recording process. Beyoncé would go into the booth, and it was like two different people were there, they told me. Sometimes she would perform with so much emotion, it was like she was not even there anymore. And when she was done, she would have no recollection of what had just happened. She could not even remember the lyrics she sang. But Sasha knew exactly what she was doing. These accounts were horrifying. It became clear that Sasha was not just a method Beyoncé used to perform. Sasha was in control. The more I spoke to those close to her, the more I began to understand that Sasha was not just a part of Beyoncé. She was something else entirely. Something that had taken on a life of its own. But what was this force? What was Sasha? Some people I spoke to hinted at something darker, something beyond the surface. They spoke of a transformation, an awakening that had occurred during one of Beyoncé's most important moments in her career. There were whispers that Sasha was not just a persona created for performance. Some believed that Sasha had been awakened through rituals. Rituals Beyoncé may not have fully understood at the time. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more unsettling details. One insider shared a story that chilled me to the bone. They spoke of a time when Beyoncé had been invited to a private event, a gathering of influential figures in the entertainment industry. After the event, she was reportedly different. She was more intense, more confident, more dangerous. People who had seen her before noticed a change in her energy. It was as if Sasha had fully taken over. The shift was so noticeable that it alarmed those around her. Was it possible that Sasha was more than just a product of Beyoncé's mind? Was it possible that Sasha was something that had been awakened by forces beyond her control? The more I dug, the more I began to question the nature of Sasha's power. Was this force something that Beyoncé had willingly created? Or had it always been inside her, waiting for the right moment to emerge? But the worst part was the realization that Sasha's power had grown. It was not just a side of Beyoncé anymore. It was something far more dangerous. People around her began to speak of how Sasha was taking over, not just her performances, but her life, her personality, her very identity. The deeper I went, the more I realized that Beyoncé was no longer in control. Sasha was. This was the moment I began to understand the true power of Sasha. She was not just a character on stage. She was something ancient, something dangerous, something that had taken hold of Beyoncé, body and soul. And now, as the years passed, the hold she had on her was only getting stronger. What Beyoncé had created to empower herself had become a prison. A prison that she might never escape. But what was Sasha truly? Was she just a manifestation of Beyoncé's need for power, or was she something far more malevolent? I did not know, but the more I learned, the more it seemed that Sasha had a life of her own, and it was a life that Beyoncé could not control. But if Sasha's power had truly taken hold of Beyoncé, what would happen when she finally broke free? Would there be anything left of Beyoncé at all? The deeper I dug into Beyoncé's life, the more I began to realize that the world around her was not what it appeared to be. Fame, as I had always believed, had its price, but what I discovered about Beyoncé's rise to stardom was something much darker. Sasha Fierce was not just a persona created for the stage. She was a vessel that had been filled with something ancient, something darker than anyone could understand. Everyone had always talked about the power that Beyoncé exuded when she was on stage. They spoke about her transformation, the way she commanded the audience, the way she became something untouchable. But no one ever talked about the cost of that power. No one talked about how it had slowly consumed her. I began speaking to more people who had been close to Beyoncé during her climb to the top. They spoke of the early days, of how Beyoncé was just a regular young woman with a dream. But as her career grew, something began to change. Sasha Fierce, who had started as a tool for performance, began to take on a life of its own. And with that shift, the people around Beyoncé started to notice changes in her. At first, the changes were subtle. It was as if Beyoncé was becoming more confident, more powerful. But it soon became clear that Sasha's influence was not just making her stronger, it was making her something else. It was shaping her into someone unrecognizable, someone who was no longer fully in control of her own life. I began to hear more about the dark side of fame, the part no one ever talked about. One of the people I spoke to was an old friend of Beyoncé's, someone who had known her before the fame, before Sasha. They told me stories about the way Beyoncé used to be, how she was kind, humble, and deeply connected to her roots. But as time went on, that part of her began to disappear. Beyoncé used to be real, the friend said, her voice thick with emotion. She used to care about people, about her family, but as Sasha took over, she became something else. She became distant, cold. It was like she was slipping away and Sasha was filling the void. The more I heard, the more I realized that Sasha was not just a tool for power. She was something that had been created through a sacrifice. A price had been paid, and it was more than Beyoncé ever realized. I began to learn about the price of fame in ways I could not have imagined. People spoke of rituals, of secret meetings, and events where Beyoncé was invited into a world far darker than the glittering stages she performed on. One source described a moment in Beyoncé's early career when she had been invited to a private gathering of influential figures in the entertainment industry. This event was different, the source explained. It was not like any other show or party. There was something off about it. Beyoncé was there, but she was not the same. It was like Sasha had taken over completely. People could feel it. It was almost like she was being groomed for something. I could not ignore the growing sense that Sasha's power was not something Beyoncé had invited in willingly. It was something she had been drawn into, something that had been waiting for her to become the person she needed to be. The more I learned, the more I began to question if Sasha had been awakened intentionally, or if Beyoncé had been manipulated into creating her. Was Sasha a force that had always been inside her, ready to emerge when the time was right? Or had something else, something more sinister, pushed her to become what she is now. What was clear, however, was that this power had a cost. Fame itself was the price. The more Beyoncé rose, the more Sasha took control. The world saw her as an icon, a goddess of music and performance, but the reality was far different. Beyoncé was becoming a shell of her former self, and Sasha was filling that shell with a dangerous presence that no one truly understood. People began to speak of the toll fame had taken on Beyoncé. Her personal relationships began to suffer. Those who were closest to her, who had known her before the fame, started to see her pull away. Friends and family noticed the distance, the coldness, the lack of connection. Sasha had become a wedge between Beyoncé and the people who loved her. The more she performed, the more Sasha took over, and the less Beyoncé remained. I heard stories from people who had been part of Beyoncé's inner circle. One person told me about a time when Beyoncé's behavior became so erratic that her team began to worry about her mental state. But when they tried to intervene, to talk to her about the toll her fame was taking on her, they were met with resistance. She would not listen, the insider said. She was not the same person anymore. It was like she was hearing everything, but not really hearing anything. Sasha was in control, and that was the horrifying truth. Sasha had stopped being something Beyoncé could turn on and off. She had become something far more powerful. She had become a force that controlled Beyoncé's every move, her every action. The more I learned, the more I understood that Sasha was not just a performance tool. She was the result of something darker, a price Beyoncé had unknowingly paid. Fame had not just come with the cost of personal sacrifice. It had come with the cost of her soul. I began to realize that Beyoncé was living in a prison. She had built it herself, but Sasha had locked her inside. The world saw Beyoncé as a star, as a woman who had everything: wealth, fame, success. But the truth was far darker. The truth was that Beyoncé was a prisoner of her own creation, and Sasha was the warden. But as the years went by, the cost of that fame began to take an even darker toll. What would happen when Sasha's grip on Beyoncé became too strong to break? The more I uncovered about Sasha Fierce, the more I realized that the battle Beyoncé had been fighting was not just against the pressures of fame. It was against something much darker, something far more powerful. Sasha was no longer just a persona. She was a force, one that had taken hold of Beyoncé's mind, body, and soul in ways that no one could have predicted. And as the years went on, it became clearer that Beyoncé was losing herself to Sasha. The transformation that people had noticed early on had escalated. Beyoncé was no longer the young woman who had once been full of dreams and ambition. The spark in her eyes, the warmth she once had, began to fade. People who had known her before fame, those who had witnessed her rise to stardom, started to speak of the shift in her personality. It was subtle at first, but over time, the changes became impossible to ignore. Sasha had taken over completely, and the person Beyoncé used to be was slipping away. I spoke to one of Beyoncé's childhood friends, someone who had known her before the world had ever heard of Destiny's Child. This person had watched her grow, had seen the young girl with a passion for music and a desire to change the world. But when I spoke to them, they described a woman who was no longer the same. "She's not the Beyoncé we knew," the friend said, their voice barely above a whisper. "She's become someone else, someone we cannot reach. It's like Sasha's in control and Beyoncé is just gone." The friend went on to describe how Beyoncé used to be full of energy, always surrounded by family and friends, always engaging with the people who had supported her from the beginning. But as her fame grew, so did Sasha's grip. The warmth she had once shown others began to disappear. The more Beyoncé performed, the more Sasha took over. I remember a time when we went to a family gathering, the friend recalled. Beyoncé was there, but it was not really her. She was not laughing like she used to. She was not engaging with anyone. It was like she was distant, almost cold. We tried to reach her, but it was like talking to a wall. Sasha was there, and Beyoncé was nowhere to be found. As time went on, those closest to her began to notice that Sasha had become more than just a stage persona. She was taking over every part of Beyoncé's life. People who worked with her described how she would go on stage, transform into Sasha, and then return to her dressing room, her eyes vacant, her mind seemingly far away. There were reports of her not remembering parts of her performances, not recalling entire conversations. Sasha was no longer a choice. It was an invasion. One of Beyoncé's backup dancers who had worked with her for years told me about a particularly disturbing incident that made it clear just how much control Sasha had gained. We were rehearsing for a big show, the dancer explained, and Beyoncé was off. She was not herself. She looked at me, and I swear, it was not her looking back. It was Sasha. She did not remember what had happened in rehearsal. But Sasha knew everything. She always knew. It was like Beyoncé was just gone. What was most unsettling was that even when Beyoncé tried to take back control, even when she wanted to reconnect with the people around her, Sasha would push her down. Sasha had grown stronger over the years, and with that strength came a chilling new power. Beyoncé's attempts to break free were becoming more futile. She was losing herself to Sasha, and there seemed to be no way back. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep the influence of Sasha went. People around her began to tell me about moments when they would try to speak to Beyoncé, try to pull her out of the trance Sasha had cast over her. But it was like speaking to a stranger. The person they once knew was no longer there. They had become witnesses to Beyoncé's slow disappearance, watching as the woman they once adored was replaced by something or someone else. But it was not just her relationships that were falling apart. As Sasha took control, Beyoncé's work began to suffer as well. Those close to her described how Sasha's influence began to seep into every aspect of her career. Her performances became more erratic, more intense, as though Sasha was pushing her past her limits. There were times when Beyoncé would collapse after a performance, drained, her body broken from the exertion of trying to keep up with Sasha's demands. But despite the exhaustion, despite the toll it took on her physically and mentally, Sasha always demanded more. And Beyoncé always gave more. The more I spoke to people, the more I realized that Sasha was not just consuming Beyoncé's personal life, it was consuming her career as well. Her creativity began to suffer, and her passion for music, which had once been her driving force, seemed to fade. In its place was a cold, calculating energy that took over every note, every movement, every performance. Sasha's energy, dark and unrelenting, began to overshadow the essence of Beyoncé's artistry. One of Beyoncé's producers confided in me about the shift they had witnessed. Beyoncé used to bring this light to the studio, the producer said. Her energy was infectious, but then Sasha took over. It was not just about the music anymore. It was about power. It was like Beyoncé stopped making music for herself and started making it for Sasha. And I knew then she was no longer in control. It was impossible to ignore the reality any longer. Beyoncé was slipping away. The woman the world adored, the woman who had inspired millions with her strength and talent, was no longer fully present. Sasha had taken over every part of her, and no one knew how to bring her back. But what happens when Sasha completely consumes her? What will be left of Beyoncé when there is no more space for her? The answer to that question is darker than anyone could imagine. As the years passed, it became clear that Beyoncé was trapped. She had become a prisoner of Sasha Fierce, unable to escape the force that had taken control of her life. The more I learned about what had been happening behind the scenes, the more I realized how deep Sasha's grip truly was. It was not just about performances anymore. It was about survival. Beyoncé had created Sasha to empower herself, but over time, Sasha had begun to consume her entirely. The question now was, could Beyoncé ever break free? People close to Beyoncé began to tell me about her inner struggles, the battles that no one saw. They spoke of the desperation in her eyes, the times when she would try to fight against the force that had overtaken her, but always failed. Sasha had grown too powerful. Beyoncé had lost the ability to control her, and now she was caught in a cycle she could not escape. One person I spoke to had been a close confidant of Beyoncé's for years. They described how Beyoncé would often confide in them, talking about how she felt like she was losing herself. She would say it was like someone else was living her life, the source said, like she was watching everything happen from the outside but could not get in. Sasha was in control, and Beyoncé could not stop it. The pain in their voice was evident as they described how Beyoncé had tried to break free from Sasha. There were moments when she would become determined, when she would talk about finding her way back to who she truly was. But these moments were fleeting. They were never enough to overcome Sasha's overwhelming presence. She tried so hard to regain control, the confidant continued, but Sasha was always one step ahead. It was like Beyoncé was playing a game she could not win. The more she fought, the more Sasha tightened her hold. What struck me the most was the emotional toll this battle had taken.
On Beyoncé, this was not just a fight for control. It was a fight for her very identity. Sasha had taken over her persona, her body, her mind. And the more Beyoncé struggled, the more she seemed to disappear. It was as if Sasha was not just consuming her externally, but was eating away at her very essence. I began to see how the people around her were affected. Her team, her family, her friends, they all watched as Beyoncé's once vibrant and confident persona began to wither. They could see it in her eyes. They could see the emptiness that Sasha had left behind. And they tried to help, but no one knew how to reach her. No one could break through the wall Sasha had built. There were moments when Beyoncé would break down, when the weight of everything seemed to be too much for her to bear. She would cry, and those who were closest to her would try to comfort her. But even in those moments of vulnerability, Sasha would always resurface. It was like a shadow, always lurking, always waiting for the moment to take control again. I heard countless stories from those who had witnessed this struggle firsthand. They spoke of how Beyoncé's spirit seemed to be breaking, how the woman who had once been unstoppable was now consumed by something she could not understand. And the more she fought, the more it seemed like Sasha was winning. There were even moments when Beyoncé would have what seemed like breakthroughs, when she would appear to regain some control. But these moments were short-lived. The power that Sasha wielded over her was just too strong. It was not just about the performances, the tours, or the music. It was about a force that had taken hold of her life and refused to let go. And then came the scariest part. The realization that Sasha might not just be a persona anymore. It was no longer clear whether Sasha was something Beyoncé could control at all. What if Sasha was not just a part of Beyoncé, but was an independent force, something that had been growing inside her for years? What if Sasha had become something more than Beyoncé ever intended? What if Sasha was the one in charge now, and Beyoncé was simply a passenger in her own life? As the struggle continued, Beyoncé began to withdraw from the world even more. She became less accessible, more distant, and her performances started to reflect that. Her energy was no longer the same. There was a coldness to her that had not been there before. Sasha's grip had tightened, and Beyoncé was slipping further away. But there was still a part of her that fought back. There were moments, however brief, when she seemed to regain a flicker of her former self. It was as if she was trying to push Sasha out, to take control again. But those moments were becoming rarer and rarer. Sasha had become too strong. What would happen when Sasha's grip on Beyoncé became irreversible? What if Sasha had already won, and there was no way back? As I continued to uncover the truth about Sasha Fierce,
something became overwhelmingly clear. Beyoncé's battle was not just with her own identity. It was with something far darker, something that no one fully understood. Sasha had evolved into something more than a persona, more than an alter ego. She had become a force that Beyoncé had unknowingly unleashed. The more I learned, the more I began to realize that the battle for control was not just between Beyoncé and Sasha. It was a battle for her very soul. I was sitting with one of Beyoncé's oldest friends when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. This person had seen it all: the rise to fame, the transformation from a young woman with big dreams to the powerhouse that is Beyoncé. They had witnessed the creation of Sasha, and they had seen the consequences of it. But now, with everything I had learned, the truth hit me with a force I had never expected. She is not who she used to be, the friend said, their voice breaking as they spoke. Sasha has taken over, and we cannot bring her back. Not now, not ever. The weight of their words hit like a punch to the stomach. I had suspected it for so long, but hearing it from someone who had been there from the beginning made it undeniable. Sasha was no longer just a part of Beyoncé. Sasha had become Beyoncé. The line between the two had blurred until there was nothing left of the woman she had once been. Sasha had claimed her entirely. What happens now? I asked, barely able to process the truth that was unfolding before me. The friend hesitated before answering. Sasha is stronger than Beyoncé could ever be. And the worst part is, I do not think Beyoncé knows how much of herself she has lost. I sat there, stunned by the realization. All the signs, all the whispers, all the dark hints that I had heard over the years were now laid bare. Sasha was not just a performance tool. She was a living, breathing entity, one that had overtaken Beyoncé in ways that no one could have imagined. The transformation was complete. Beyoncé was gone, and Sasha was in full control. The friend went on to describe the moments when Beyoncé would seem like herself, those brief, fleeting glimpses of the woman she had once been. But they were just that. Glimpses. Sasha was always there. lurking just beneath the surface, ready to take over at any given moment. And when Sasha took control, there was no stopping her. She was unrelenting, powerful, and impossible to break free from. I could feel the chill in the air as the friend spoke. I had come to understand that what Kanye had said that day, "That's not her up there, it's Sasha," was more than just a casual comment. It was the truth. Sasha had taken over completely, and now there was nothing left of Beyoncé but a shell. She had become a vessel for something much darker than any of us could have anticipated. But the most chilling part of it all was the realization that this was the price of fame. Beyoncé had sacrificed herself for the world to see. She had traded her true identity for the power, for the adoration, for the fame. And now, she was paying the price. Sasha had claimed her, and there was no turning back. Kanye's words echoed in my mind, louder than ever. "That's not her up there, it's Sasha." In that moment, I understood what he meant. Sasha was no longer just a character Beyoncé had created. She was a force that had taken over every part of her life. What started as a tool for empowerment had become a prison where Beyoncé was locked away, unable to escape. Sasha had become more than an alter ego. She had become an entity, a dark presence that controlled her every move. And now, with everything I had learned, I could not escape the truth. Beyoncé was no longer the woman we knew. Sasha had won. The woman who had inspired millions, the woman who had once shone brighter than any star, was gone. All that was left was Sasha, uncontrollable, unrelenting, and in full control. What Kanye had said was not just a warning. It was the truth. Sasha was here to stay.